be running the slides for me, so there might be some little dysfunction there, but that's okay. So I'm excited to share my story with you guys. I guess to start out, just wanted to set the tone for the presentation. Kind of want it to be an open discussion, so feel free to ask questions. Casey, if you see anybody raising their hand or anything from the WebEx, just jot in and stop me from rambling on. And really the point is to talk about everybody else on the line as opposed to me, and I want to make sure that I get the information across to you guys that you need. So if I'm not touching on something or you have a more specific question, feel free to ask me, and we can take it from there. So I guess we can go to the next slide. So I guess I wanted to start the presentation with my story and then kind of build off that just to talk about some key learnings that I had throughout my process, both at Goucher and also developing my early career. And I guess I could start kind of my junior year, summer before senior year. I was studying abroad in Cambridge University, did a short couple-week intensive there during the summer and then did a little Euro trip. So like a few of us Goucher alum study abroad, you learn a lot about not necessarily the world, which is the point, but also about yourself. And that was kind of when I had my oh crap senior moment that I'm studying something that I don't necessarily want to do for the rest of my life. So like a bunch of people have been there. So I kind of started there, and I was a chemistry major at the time. I had a job lined up at DuPont, but I didn't necessarily want to stay in the chemical field forever. And at the study abroad, I kind of started talking with people that were entrepreneurs and associated with the tech industry. I'm like, wow, that's a pretty cool thing. So I kind of pocketed that in my mind and decided to kind of store it and make it an end goal in the future for a couple of years. So nonetheless, I started my career at DuPont. I was a research chemist, was there for 2 years, and then decided to move over to Sabic when I started firming up the idea that tech is the eventual place I wanted to be. So I moved into a leadership program purely on the business side with Sabic in their innovative plastics division. And then after a few months there, I was able to make a lucky transition over to Bosch in the tech world out in San Francisco. So that's kind of the whole path so far, as I'm currently at Bosch as a senior business systems analyst. So we can kind of dive in a little bit deeper there and start with really what I learned at study abroad in my senior year, which is building your brand. And you can go to the next slide. So this was kind of an aha moment for me that I never realized I was doing it until years later. In the case, meaning build your brand. So if you go to the next slide, there's a quote from Jeff Bezos that kind of sums up, you know, if you have the question, what is my brand? Your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room, right? It's kind of the impression you give people that they remember, and it's easy to get across, and it's quite memorable. You know, you've ever met somebody that was really enthusiastic or spontaneous. These are kind of things that you attach on with the persona and you remember. And it's really easy to get that across, you know, just by meeting somebody really, really shortly, like an interview. And then also as you establish your career, you know, whether it be just taking classes at school or actually in the workplace, your brand is kind of how you engage with people and how people expect you to behave. So when I was graduating from Goucher, I sort of realized, you know, that brand could play into me getting a job when I was moving on, applying to jobs before I had gotten DuPont. So if you go to the next slide, I can kind of touch into this a little bit more. So the brand that I initially wanted to go after was an entrepreneur. I had just learned what it was in my study abroad. I didn't really, you know what it embodied, but I kind of gave myself 4 different attributes I wanted to get across when I started my career, and that was being a self-starter, being a global thinker, being a teammate, and being dynamic. So in the sense that I could pick up things really, really quickly. And basically, when I was going into school, I didn't, or into my early career, like I said before, I didn't really know what a brand was, or I didn't really even know how to answer the question what a brand even, you know, is, or what it's supposed to be. How am I supposed to relate that to somebody? But what I did know is what I wanted, right? And I wanted it really bad, and that was to get into the tech world eventually. So I decided the fastest way to make this transition was literally jump into the problem head first, and I started that my senior year. So I created a little startup company, and we did swimming wearables and software for swim coaches. So I was a chemistry major. I knew literally nothing about tech. Didn't know computer programming. It scared me just to even think about it. Didn't know anything about wearable hardware. Didn't know anything about starting a business. Never took a business course, but figured, you know, if this is something I want to do, I might as well jump in head first. I have 1 year to kind of catch up for studying something different, and just jumped in. So the interesting thing, apart from just being, you know, having that as my self-starter mentality, was that, you know, we're all a Goucher, and we have this amazing chance to work with people from really different backgrounds, right? So also the chance to study completely different topics. So really it was that liberal arts background initially that allowed me to kind of embrace this challenge, which was learning software development and, you know, basics of creating a business. So basically learning something entirely new. And essentially I kind of likened it at the time to taking my first philosophy course freshman year. And basically I went into that, absolutely no idea what philosophy was, and basically it was just talking right through my ear, didn't really understand it, but eventually, you know, I started to understand and make sense of it. So it's really kind of embracing your background and understanding that you've already studied really, really different things that have no relation to each other. So, you know, kind of be confident and dive into something with the ability to learn it. I think that's an interesting background that we all have. It kind of jives well, you know, moving forward with the rest of my story. And kind of looking back, you know, I did all this without wanting to establish, you know, my actual brand. I did this just because it was things I wanted to learn and an eventual goal, and I said these were skills I needed. But by going out and learning those particular skills, it kind of established my brand of, you know, this is, you know, I'm a really good self-starter. It's something that, you know, people catch up on my interviews when they ask me about, you know, my business ventures. They're like, you know, how did you get into this? I'm like, I had an idea and I did it. You know, I taught myself that, and I think it's pretty impactful. And it's something you guys can start thinking about, you know, early in your careers, even at Goucher, is to develop some of these attributes that you want to get across, and then to put things on your resume that really kind of prove it. So we can move on to the next slide. So that was senior year at Goucher. So the first step to, you know, starting a career really is selling yourself. You're coming out of school. I was coming out as a chemistry major. I took the same classes that every other chemistry major in this country took. I did do some study abroad for some undergrad research for 3 years. Also had to study abroad, so those were slightly defining, but then again, lots of people do that, right? So how do you sell yourself to a hiring board and get that job? And initially, when I went to DuPont, I thought, or at least when I was interviewing at DuPont, I thought those were really the only things they were going to be interested in, was my undergrad research, my chemistry background, the study abroad I did specifically in chemistry. And during those initial interviews, I had 3 rounds of interviews and, you know, probably 5 to 6 hours for each round, right? So that's roughly 15 hours of interview. In the entire time that I was interviewing, I probably talked less than an hour about my actual chemical background. Instead, I kept reciting the story about how I started easy coaching, what I learned, any roadblocks, how to get across, you know, and over them, and kind of create this thing for myself. So it was interesting to me at that time that that's all my interviewers really cared about, was the fact that I taught myself something and had an entrepreneurial mindset versus what I could actually do at the lab bench. So, you know, I was thinking to myself during the interview process, what does this mean? If you go to the next slide, we should be on 5, building your brand. Sorry, 7. So starting your group, yeah. And really that's when I started realizing those attributes that I'd put on myself and that brand I had built was what was really beating the competition for me. I had a brand that put me ahead of, you know, 500 identical undergrad chemists. You know, some of them may have had a higher GPA, some of them may have gone to, you know, more well-known schools or even had a higher degree like a master's, but I was an entrepreneur. So it was something slightly different from everybody else, and it made me kind of unique. So after several interviews, I began to realize that, you know, this really was the ace up my sleeve and that I could win the job by playing off of this. And I wanted to make sure that they remembered me as the entrepreneur, somebody who started a business, who learned something entirely new by myself, versus Kyle as the chemist who did undergrad research just like everybody else. So I want to pause right there with the career stuff and just do a really quick crash course in selling. So you never, if there's one sentence you should never learn in your life is you never sell features, you sell benefits, right? So at the idea when I was selling, at the time of the interviews when I was selling them on the idea of an entrepreneur, I wasn't necessarily just saying, hey, I'm an entrepreneur and that's it. It was, how is that going to make me a better fit for DuPont and how is that going to make DuPont money, right? So translate my uniqueness into a benefit specific to them. So in DuPont's eyes, this meant my training would be a little bit quicker than everybody else. And by quicker, I did 3 months of safety training and prep work before I actually got into the lab, right? So if you could cut that down by 30, basically 30%, you're saving an entire month worth of salary in getting somebody up productive. And not only that, it's, at DuPont, frequently you're moving projects. So if they had faith that I'd be able to pick up something very, very quickly, I can make those transitions into different projects a lot smoother than other people could. So really, when you guys are starting your career, think about those unique things. Think about the brand that you've established that's different from other people, and then translate that into what is the company that's hiring you going to get out of it, right? So in the end, business always comes down to money. So if you could prove to them that hiring you is a smart business decision, that they're going to save money or save time, effectively money, by hiring you, that's definitely something that's going to set you guys apart. So I'll move on into stepping stones. So I guess I said it right here. This is something I learned later in my career, is that no one cares more about you than you. So I was at DuPont for about a year, still with this tech idea in the back of my head. I was still working with Easy Coaching. We're doing some really cool stuff, winning a lot of business plan competitions, getting a lot of great feedback. I was learning a heck of a lot. The only problem was at DuPont, it was pretty much stagnant. I was still a chemist. I was still doing research and development. There wasn't a lot that was really, really interesting or engaging to me. And I started to feel that my progression towards my end goal of being in the tech world was kind of stagnant. So, naturally I started talking with my boss and like, this is the end goal, this is what I want to get into, meaning, tech management. And I could have totally done that at DuPont. DuPont has actually a lot of computational science and data analytic programs that they work on. It's not really just a strict chemistry program or material science like they're known for. So I knew there was potential to grow in there, so I was speaking with my boss and seeing if I could get opportunities in my current role to kind of grow and develop those skills that I need to make that transition. And that's where I started looking and learning a little bit more about the average length of people in my role, which was 4 to 5 years. And then it was just a small promotion still within the span of research and development. And I kept applying to other things, and my applications were actually not even sent. They were just straight up denied, which was a little bit concerning. So right then I realized that, you could have an awesome manager, work for an awesome company, because I really enjoyed the people I worked with at DuPont, but, they're going to concern themselves with, what you're doing and what they hired you to do. And if your future goals don't really line up with it, there may be a roadblock. And the only way, I wanted to get around a roadblock was not waiting 4 or 5 years or waiting for some, random job offer to come up. It was to go out, literally hack and find one. So you can go to the next slide, which is stepping stone. Yeah, actively pursue your career goal. Yeah, it's a little confusing going over the phone. So once I decided that I wanted to kind of commit for that new opportunity to move on from DuPont, I began to kind of reach out into my network, which I'll talk about a little bit more in the future, and also see, really if my end goal is tech, what are the skills that I want to develop in this next role to kind of further prepare me, right? So I didn't look just for any type of job. I was looking for a specific kind of job that gave me skills that I knew I would need. So the skills that I actually outlined that I wanted to develop was experience in sales and also experience in strict project management. So away from just running a chemistry program or, running a research project, but into more of like a people management and team dynamic of project management. So I had kind of bootleg experience in both of those through the startup ventures, but I wanted to get more, more like a certificate of approval on my resume. So I went out to find corporate experience in that. So within that realm, I knew, you know, it'd be a big jump to just go right into like finance or right into, you know, Wall Street or something crazy like that. You know, I thought about applying, but I didn't really think that I had a strong enough resume to do that. So I said, I've got this in the chemical industry. I've got a lot of contacts. Let me reach into those contacts, see if there's anything that's open. And I came across a corporate development program at SABIC Innovative Plastics. And basically, this was a rotational corporate leadership development program. It's a big mouthful. And this is, the intriguing part was that it was rotational and that it was giving me new rotations in different areas of business. So I had sales, I was going to go into marketing, I was going into pricing, analyst, and also a technical field in plastics processing. So it was interesting that these are like relatively short-term roles that gave me the experience that I wanted, because in each one of those rotations, I was given a project that I had to do. And it was, the whole program was kind of based off of that project management aspect, and then also picking up and learning different bits of business skills relatively quickly, and then making an impact. So I kind of fed right into the mantra that I was trying to develop for myself, which was learning really, really quickly. And basically, I saw this as a great opportunity to grow. You know, it was kind of bad because I went into the program not necessarily excited to work at SABIC, which is awful to say. Although, you know, the people there were great, and it was a good opportunity to learn. And really that opportunity to learn was more what I was after. It was also during this time that I really decided to double down on the tech efforts. So by that, I mean, I literally put in close to 30 to 35 hours of online coursework a week in strict computer programming. So this was something I wasn't doing as a part of my ventures with Easy Coaching and other things. I was never a developer. I was more of the business analyst kind of management side of things. I never actually got down and dirty with their developers. So I said, you know, this is a skill that I need to learn if I want to, you know, end up in Silicon Valley or anything like that, right? Everybody knows computer programming. So I literally taught myself for, you know, 6 or 7 months, taught myself a span of different languages. Not that I could pass myself off as a developer, but I could replace the developers that were on our team and make a product. And I could, you know, show that, you know, I was that devoted to get into the tech world that I would take all of that ownership on myself. So really the main point on this slide and with these stepping stones of moving into a new career is that you should always really take the time to sit down and figure out where you want to go in your career, and you really own it, right? So it's talking about owning your career on the previous slide, but also setting that roadmap and setting expectations of, you know, what are the things I want to learn in my next job, and how does that, you know, relate to the grand scheme of things of where you eventually want to end up. And then figure out the best path to make it happen, and really go after it. And if you need to learn new skills, go out and learn them. It's not, you know, if you're really passionate about something, I don't think you have to feel like you're working to learn a new skill. For me, it was a lot of fun. You know, go home from work, sit down to the computer, figure out how to make something. I never really thought I was teaching myself or developing job skills, you know, eventually to get tech. I was just super passionate about it and really wanted to put in the effort to get there. So we can move on to the next slide, which is touching about networking. And I kind of alluded to it before, and I wanted to spend a little bit of time on this topic because I'm sitting in a conference room right now that I'd never be in if I hadn't networked. You know, I would have never made that initial job change from DuPont to SABIC if it wasn't for my network. DuPont was literally the only place that hired me without any knowledge of, you know, anybody that worked there, right? I had no connection to them. I just sent in a resume and I got the job. And usually, and, you know, I can't even say that because they were recruiting through Goucher. So based off of Goucher's reputation, there was ins there. So it's very, very important. And, you know, a lot of people frown on networking, say, you know, people get a job that they don't deserve because of that. You know, it's a part of life. I don't want to say tragic, because it's you know, I think it's a necessary skill that you guys have to develop, but, you know, there's different ways you could go about it. So I always thought networking was super awkward. The most awkward being at SABIC, we're in this, you know, commercial leadership program, so they literally threw a bunch of, you know, recent college grads into a room with these big up executives, and we just had to wear a suit and tie, you know, drink cocktails and tell them our deep, dark secrets of what we want to do, and, you know, beg them for a connection in their career. You know, it's weird. I don't think I'm the only one that thinks that. It's kind of an awkward situation to be in. And, you know, in reality, networking doesn't work like this at all. I've never made a single meaningful connection at any one of those mixers where it was forced and where I didn't establish, you know, kind of a personal connection with them first. And I'm not saying that those things aren't important, but you can't go in there with the sole expectation of meeting somebody just to get their business cards, right? If there's any, you know, good advice for that is going into one of those things and caring about the person and establishing a personal connection with them. Whether that's, you know, I guess one interesting story is I went to one of these uncomfortable entrepreneurial networking events where everybody was sitting around in a room. I didn't know anybody, and I was just, you know, walking around essentially quiet for a while. It was super awkward. Then I saw somebody wearing a Pinehurst golf polo, and I just played golf at Pinehurst, or I was just going to play golf at Pinehurst. And I knew Pinehurst made all these renovations to one of the courses. The U.S. Open was being played that year at the course. So I just started talking to him about golf. Talked to him for about 20, 25 minutes, established that connection, and I come to, you know, take away from that at the end of the conversation. He's like, oh, so, you know, why are you here? I explained my startup relatively quickly, and he's like, oh, I'm in the Google board, literally the venture capital arm of Google, and I've just been talking to him for 25 minutes. Next week, I go down to Pinehurst to play golf. He texts me, just basically like, hey, I'm in Pinehurst right now. Do you want to go grab some lunch? So it was that simple. You know, I developed that connection with him. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of events that kind of came together randomly to make that meeting occur. But it was the fact that, you know, I was genuinely passionate about him. He remembered me for something not necessarily about my startup. So I think it's an interesting take, and never, you know, never hold a personal connection or something like that, you know, lightly. And you don't want to be that guy just kind of selling yourself, you know. We'll put this in the illegal sense of just, you know, soliciting yourself for a business card. It's awful, and it's not really received well. So I'll talk about, you know, so that's one instance of networking. Sabic was really just knowing somebody in the program, giving them my resume, and getting in front of the interviews. The interesting one was in my transition to tech. So I started at Sabic. I was there for a couple of months. And not necessarily happy, pretty happy about the learning that I was able to accomplish, but, you know, wasn't really happy there as a workplace, wasn't passionate about the company or what we were, you know, doing in the marketplace. And it was at this time that my brother actually got a job at Facebook. So he's there as a product specialist, works a lot in kind of a similar area to what I wanted to get into. So I was like, wow, that's awesome. You know, he had a tech background, so they recruited him and kind of extended the offer. It was, you know, relatively quickly and relatively easy for him, but I had none of the background. So I went out to visit him purely just to kind of visit. And I also had, you know, thrown my resume in for Facebook, and I got an interview out of it, right? So I didn't think too much about it because I thought I was still kind of underqualified, but I, you know, was really out to get the free plane ticket to California just to visit my brother. So I was out there. I did the Facebook rounds of interviews, which are pretty interesting. It's a different kind of setting than I was used to. Didn't get the job, but what I did do was go out there and make a bunch of friends. And just like I was saying before, you know, network with passion and simply kind of letting people know what your goals were, but not necessarily soliciting, you know, for help. So I went out there for a week, did the interviews on one day, but the rest of the days I was just kind of hanging around the Bay Area and really getting an introduction to what tech was. You know, frankly, I was really surprised Facebook had even considered me because I still thought I was kind of underprepared, so not getting the job made sense. But I met a lot of cool people. And, you know, every time we met somebody at a party or on the weekend when we were just hanging out, they would ask me about myself. You know, I'd just, you know, talk, small talk, really, right? And, you know, I tried to work in simple ways of talking about my startup, which is very easy to talk about in Silicon Valley. And then the natural progression of questions there was, you know, so why aren't you coming out here to look for a job? You know, that explained I, you know, just went to Facebook, did some rounds of interviews, don't think I'm going to get the job. And they're like, oh, you know, that sucks. But I came home from that week trip, and within, I'd say, 2 or 3 weeks, I kept getting calls from these guys being like, hey, there's an opening on my team. You know, you seem pretty, you know, interested and passionate about getting into tech. And that was really the brand that I developed for myself. You know, it was apparent after talking to me that this is something I wanted. I taught myself a lot about it, and, you know, I didn't think I was ready, but they were basically telling me that I was, right? You know, this is something that really jived with them. And the job offers started, not job offers, but at least, you know, job openings started coming up from there. So that is, you know, kind of a spiel on networking, but super, super important. Definitely want to make sure that I'm getting that point across, if anything else. And the other interesting thing was all these people were, you know, asking me to apply for these jobs, never having looked at my resume. It was purely off the fact that I talked with them briefly, told them what my end goal was, and, you know, just based on how I held myself and the brand that I was getting across is what they were more interested in. So we can move to the next slide, which is transferring skills. So every time they came in and, you know, offered me to apply for a job or something, I would talk to them about it a bit more, see what the job was entailing. And really, I realized that these tech companies weren't concerned with hiring Ivy League computer sciences, you know, guys from Stanford or Harvard or MIT, right? You know, I always thought that was it. And if you didn't go to school there and you didn't have a massive degree from, you know, one of those top-tier universities, you had no chance. Really, what they were looking for is just people with different backgrounds that could bring in a new way of thinking. And, you know, that fed right into the liberal arts background and right into kind of the brand that I was going after. You know, I had a pretty unique background going from chemistry, so I had a completely different mindset from people. So I kind of tried to embrace that. So you go to the next slide. Really, the biggest challenge in the interview process, you know, now that I was getting in the door, was proving that I could learn these new skills in a completely new environment, right? No longer in, you know, DuPont, in a really controlled chemical environment. You know, now I'm interviewing at places with massive slide in the lobby instead of stairs, you know, completely crazy people, but also really, really brilliant people. So how can I kind of transition my corporate skills and the things I've developed myself and move them into this new environment? So after interviewing with a couple of companies, I got the job offer from Box, which is pretty awesome. And in my interviews, I was able to kind of demonstrate how, you know, the similarities of what I had were applicable specifically to the role at Box. So I'll give you an example. One of that's experimental design and troubleshooting at DuPont, right? So the essence of experimental design is realizing that, you know, the foundation is what is the problem, right? Designing then iterations off that problem of, you know, how to solve it, and knowing, you know, these are potential paths of how to solve it. And that really, you know, that idea of funneling down to what the core problem is and then identifying issues around that problem that we can tweak to fix it really jived well with, you know, something like bug triaging or prioritization in software design, right? So if you're, you know, somebody comes to you with an issue, you're able to get right down to the meat of it, you know, cut out the fluff, what's the actual issue, look down into the tech, see, you know, I'll give you an example, just like a button isn't working. Well, is the button not working, or is it the logic that's after they click the button, right? Kind of things like that. So really being able to tailor it in that respect to something, you know, more situational versus just seeing what the high-level problem is. So they will kind of utilize that background. And also another big benefit was, like I said before, was a liberal arts background and my ability to pick up, you know, new ideas, present them clearly, presentation skills, and the ability to write, right? We all went through all of the English courses. I don't know how important that is. I hated it when I was in school, right? I did not like it. It was a force to get me to write correctly. I've probably made a million grammar errors just talking with you guys. But being able to put together a presentation or just being able to consolidate ideas and present them effectively, you know, that's a skill we develop at Goucher, and that really puts you apart. You know, I've been through a bunch of awful corporate, you know, really, really bad presentations through Sabic and through DuPont. There's definitely an art to it. We have a leg up of just being able to understand an audience or understanding and put things simply in different perspectives. So really, those, you know, basically those problem solving and the ability to kind of clearly pass on ideas was two of the crucial skills I kind of needed at Box in the PM role I have. And it was an interesting pair for somebody without really a computer science background, but I was able to kind of demonstrate that. Also paired with the knowledge that I kind of taught myself of what, you know, software development was. in one of the last interviews at Box, actually, my interviewer and future teammate, really directly told me that he did not care at all that I had no experience with the systems that I'd be working with. The systems being Salesforce and Zora integrations, writing Apex code, things like that. I literally had zero, didn't even know how to answer questions that, if they asked me anything specific. Like at the high level, but didn't have the experience. And he said he didn't care, and he completely flat out told me, he's like, I really don't care. He's like, the only thing I care about is that you're going to be able to pick these up quickly. And he's like, you've done that at every single step in your career and shown that ability. So, that really kind of jived with me, and it was interesting. So really, apart from believing in those transferable skills, it's, it was interesting. It wasn't something that I thought would be received as well as it was and as early as it was. And then another little story before I kind of wrap things up that I wanted to touch on with, just on this slide, I'll add it, is culture. They also, big feed into getting the job here at Box was just the culture. And by culture, I mean, fitting well and behaving well with the team, right? So it kind of stems from brand, but it also kind of stems from, you're just not an ass to other people, right? You held yourself well in the interview, you're approachable, you didn't take it too seriously, you're an actual person and not a robot answering questions off of the script, right? I've been in a few interviews at Box, and, I can't give you too many specifics, but I can tell you that culture is more important in a lot of these things than the actual background. And it was especially the case in the selection of me. They knew they were going to have to teach me, and they knew they were going to have to work with me a lot in the beginning to get me up to speed. If I was a person that they didn't 100% love to work with or, want to hang out with, wouldn't have gotten the job. So it's, that's something very important that you guys should kind of add to the think tank of when you're applying for a job is, try and learn more about the people and the culture of the company. Make sure it's a good fit for yourself, make sure you're going to enjoy working at the place, but then also in your interview, try and add certain things about, about that to prove to them that you kind of have that culture match. Super important. We can move to the next slide just to kind of summarize things. I'd put them into 5 key points just for reference, right? So, because you can kind of just click through these, I think they'll highlight. But, one is build your brand and sell it, right? That's the idea of, owning who you want to be and being able to relate that to job requirements, right? And sell the benefit of your brand versus other people. Next is owning your own career path. So really identifying where you want to go and then taking ownership of it. Nobody's going to hand you your next job or your next promotion. You may hear stories about that, but that person was actively developing herself to get to that role to even be considered. So you really got to own it. 3 is network genuinely. So, don't be that guy, walking around a room just trying to get business cards. Really go out and meet people. I think the most meaningful networking happens, not even at any of those, strict networking events. It was, like when I was in, when I came down and visit my brother for the first time, it was just hanging out with people. And, simply telling them, when the time was appropriate, these were my goals and this is a place I wanted to end up. And you establish that relationship that somebody could come back to one day. You may never even know it was coming, but, definitely always get your brand to get, network genuinely. 4 is be creative with your background and kind of apply it in different ways. So this is that transferring skill bit at Box. A lot of people are afraid to make that jump in industry because they don't think they're ready. I was even a little bit timid about it. I didn't think I was ready. But really sit down and think about, the things that you've done in your past and how you could translate that into, a new skill set or a different skill set. You'll be surprised with how similarly, your experiences may match up for something. Once, given a little bit of thought and practicing a way that you could describe that relationship. And then 5, just basically paying attention to culture and making sure that you guys are taking that into consideration with things, down the pipe and also in your interview and stuff like that, because it could really be a make or break situation. And you don't want to be in your final round interview and not get a job purely on the fact that you were super stressed or, answering your questions like a robot versus having, personality and just having a little bit more fun with it, right? That would be really crappy. You can go to the next slide, the last slide. Just want to make sure that you guys feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or email. I list my email. I'm more than happy to answer questions if we run out of time. I think we have like 15 minutes. I could dive in a little bit deeper if you guys have any questions or anything. Anything?
So I've unmuted everybody on the webinar, so if you weren't able to speak up before now, you certainly can. If you have any questions, or you can type in any questions in chat if you have those.
Yeah, chat would be cool. You don't have to throw a random question out. It's also refreshing to hear your voice, Casey. I wasn't sure if I was talking to nobody for the last half hour.
No, I was here the whole time.
Perfect. Any questions? All right, well, I guess I could stay on the line for, I don't know if people are going to start dropping off, but I'll stay on the line for the next couple of minutes. But everybody, you know, there's still my contact information. If you didn't touch it or anything, always feel free to shoot me an email. More than happy to try and, you know, do resume work or, you know, interview help if it's something that you guys want help with. Or also, you know, utilize my connection, right? I'm a Goucher alum. We all have something in common. If you think I could help you in any way, I'd be more than happy to.
Well, thanks a lot, Kyle, for taking the time and for putting this presentation together for us. Very, very much appreciated.
Awesome. Thank you, Casey, for having me.
Sure. All right, well, if there aren't any questions, I can follow up with everyone. You can contact me, you can contact Kyle directly. But thanks so much, and hopefully we'll see you in November for our next webinar.